Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Bookishrealm. Welcome back. If you've already been here, welcome if you're new. So if you didn't know, oh my gosh, I have to sneeze. Why as soon as I start I have to sneeze? So if you're new here and you did not know, or maybe you haven't had the opportunity to watch my content so far this year, life, y'all. People are busy. I don't expect people to always watch my content. I've been doing my wrap-ups a little differently. So what I've been doing is somewhat on a weekly basis. I have been uploading these weekly reading logs where I talk about what I've read for the past week. Now, for the past 2 weeks, I've been extremely busy. Extremely busy. So this one is another 2-weeker where I think that probably is going to end up happening more than I would like to admit. But life, you know, life. It is award season for me here in the US in terms of like youth literature, so that pretty much has kept me busy at work, and when I come home I'm exhausted and I really don't feel like doing anything. But today we are here to cover 2 weeks of reading. In the 2 weeks that I have not updated y'all, I have read over 30 books in 2 weeks, which a huge chunk of that is attributed to the fact that I did the Goodreads reading challenge with a whole bunch of creators, and I was responsible for reading the past 10 years worth of Goodreads Choice Awards winners that were graphic novels and comics. Okay, so where I messed up in that video is that I did my math wrong. This was discussed in the group, but somehow I missed the message. I saw the message when I scrolled back up through the chat, but at that point I had already finished my vlog, and so there's that. So for 2012, I didn't have to do 2012 because 2013 and 2022 is actually 10 years worth of winners, even though mathematically it looks like it's not, but it is. So I ended up reading the 2012 winner, which was volume 16 of The Walking Dead. I had not read The Walking Dead in years, probably maybe 5 or 6 years since the last time I read The Walking Dead. And so I started over from the top. So I read volumes 1 through 16 of The Walking Dead. That's why that number is slightly inflated and why it looks like I read so much in the past 2 weeks. And I mean, honestly, who cares at this point? Like, it was reading. So as always, I'm going to go through and I'm just going to tell you the comics and graphic novels that I read. I will link that video up above. Remember, nothing that's comic or graphic novel related typically stays on this channel anymore. It's over on my Realm of Comics channel. Definitely check it out. Like I said, I'll link the video that I did with everyone else in the card symbol above. That way you guys can check it out if you haven't had the opportunity to check it out. But the comics and graphic novels and manga that I ended up reading in the past 2 weeks includes volumes 1 through 16 of The Walking Dead, Heartstopper Volume 3, Heartstopper Volume 4, the Squibbles collection, which is actually 3 books, and it's Adulthood is a Myth, Herding Cats is the 3rd one, and Big Happy Mushy Lump. I may have like screwed that up because clearly I didn't write that down in my notes what the actual title is. That's the 2nd one. But I did end up reading those 3. Lore Olympus Volume 1, Beautiful Creatures, the manga, The Red Maze, which is the 3rd volume in the 5 World series. I couldn't remember. I was like, what volume is that? It's the 3rd one. Mimi and the Cutie Catastrophe, and Disney Manga Tangled. I'm just as confused as y'all are about why I picked that up, but I'm gonna continue reading some more Disney manga because why not? I mean, I don't know. It was relaxing reading that, just so you know. I will be doing a wrap up of everything that I read that is comics, graphic novels, and manga at the end of this month on that channel, so be on the lookout for that if you're interested in hearing any of my specific thoughts about those titles that are not included in the video that I did for the Goodreads winners. So the first one that I'm going to talk about for the books that I'm going to be reviewing, the first one I'm going to talk about is not one that I read in the last 2 weeks, but when I did my video review with the one that included Pence's autobiography or political memoir, I forgot to include this book, and I don't know how I did that, so I'm going to go ahead and review it. And it is World Made of Glass by Amy Polonsky. This is a middle grade historical fiction that takes place in the 80s at the height of the AIDS epidemic, and we are following our main character whose dad has separated from her mother. He comes out as gay, he ends up in this relationship, and then he ends up contracting HIV, which then later on turns into AIDS. So at the beginning of this book, we are dealing with a main character who is watching her father literally die from AIDS. This is probably one of those middle grade books that's gonna tug at your heart regardless. I know that there are a lot of youth related titles that discuss the HIV AIDS epidemic, but this is the first one that I think I've read where I was like, oh my gosh, like 15% in, I was like, I low-key want to cry, because we have this child who understands how HIV can be contracted, and she has to deal with adults who are biased, who are homophobic, they're negative. It's so much for a child to have to deal with that, and having to teach adults like, just because my dad has HIV, which is now turned into AIDS, doesn't mean that I automatically have it, and I wouldn't have contracted it from him from just being around him. And there was just a specific scene in there where we have a teacher, she pokes her finger, I forget what they were even playing with, I think it was a slingshot. She pokes her finger and she gets blood, and her teacher, like, he panics and then throws the thing away and doesn't want her to have contact with anybody else. It just shows the stereotyping and the bigotry that existed and still does exist surrounding the lack of knowledge of HIV and AIDS. I think even with the knowledge that we have today in 2023, people still have these preconceived notions of HIV and AIDS that are definitely archaic. During this time in which we're following our main character, a lot was not known about HIV and AIDS. Clearly at this point it is still known to be the gay disease, and we get to see so many different angles from it. So it is a young girl who is dealing with the health of her father, the declining health of her father. We also get to see some of the protesting and activism that takes place during that time. There were a couple times, and I don't know how I forgot this, about the involvement of Dr. Fauci during the AIDS epidemic. I don't know how, like, I knew that, but when I heard his name, I was like, yeah, Ashley, duh, that's right. Like, Dr. Fauci was the one that was giving a lot of communication from the medical field. They talk about the first trials of drugs to help combat HIV and AIDS, and by that time, of course, her father would not have been well enough to take any of that stuff. They talk about drugs, like on preventative drugs on the black market that people were willing to try just so they could get better. And I think that we see our main character go just through so many different phases, because not only is she dealing with the death of her father, but there's still some anger and bitterness about the fact that her parents did end up divorcing. And it's not that she's upset that her father is gay, but she is upset at her father's partner for essentially taking her father away. I think it is a combination of seeing your parent with someone else that's not your parent, you know, and then also her father ended up contracting HIV from his partner. His partner didn't know, and that is discussed in the context of the book. I thought this one was just really, really well written. It was definitely a tough read. It was not an easy read. I think that this definitely hones in on the emotions and essentially the pain that our main character is feeling. So we don't really get to see her explore anything else outside of her father's illness. And I think that's the one thing that I didn't really care for, is that her care and her passion for the activism is great, but I think that if you're not careful in showing other attributes of the character, they end up falling flat sometimes. And I think that's what happened with our main character here, where I loved the relationship dynamics that she has with her family and her dad's partner, and how she learns about the activism that he did before he got sick, and her wanting to be involved in the activism and learning how her dad's illness is impacting her mother. So I think that there's a lot to be said about that, but at the same time I wanted to know more about her outside of that, because it just led to a very flat character at some points in the narrative, if that even begins to make sense. So this book definitely has content warnings for illness, death, homophobia, really bigoted thoughts towards HIV and AIDS. So definitely be prepared for that. But it's unlike any other middle grade book that I've read that's touched on the AIDS epidemic. I don't even think I've read any middle grade. I've read YA, but I don't think I've read any middle grade that's touched on the AIDS epidemic. So this was well done. Highly, highly recommend it. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars, I believe. Okay, so the big one that I ended up finishing, which people are like, Ashley, why are you doing this to yourself? People are going to think that I'm doing this intentionally, and it's not intentionally. As I have said on my Instagram in stories, I love political nonfiction. I enjoy it because it helps me see things through a different lens, because I know where I stand on certain topics when it comes to politics, and I like to read opposing views because I feel like it helps me develop my stance on certain things. And when I have conversations with people, it's easier to navigate seeing from both sides, even if I don't necessarily agree with the opposing viewpoint. I think it just helps me in terms of dialoguing with people when it comes to politics, if that makes sense. I'm a history buff. I'm always have been into politics, so whenever y'all see me reading these books, it's not clickbait. I'm not reading this I'm not going into these things thinking like, oh, I'm gonna absolutely hate them, because sometimes I go into them and I'm like, okay, there's a couple of points where I see where they're coming from, even though we fundamentally do not agree on anything when it comes to politics. Now, Pence's book was a complete shit show, and that's fine. It's perfectly fine. But I ended up reading Tim Scott's book, which is called America, A Redemption Story, Choosing Hope, Creating Unity. And I was very surprised. I have never been a Tim Scott person. I've never been a fan of his. If you didn't know, Tim Scott is a senator in the state of South Carolina. I've never been a fan of his because he has this very great relationship with Lindsey Graham, and I loathe Lindsey Graham so much. And so I was just very interested in seeing where he came from in terms of his background and policies. And we grew up essentially in the same area. We're decades apart in terms of age, but we did grow up in the same area. So I was just very interested in seeing just his perspective and view, especially being a Black Republican. And I don't work on the assumption that all Black people are Democrats, because that's not true. There are people who are Black that are conservative, that are moderate, that are liberal. We are a wide spectrum of individuals. We are not a monolith. So I have never really read something from the perspective of a Black conservative, and so I was interested to see where he was going to come from in a lot of stuff. I still don't think that I fundamentally agree with Scott on anything. I think that he definitely is more on the conservative side than I am, but in reading this book, I felt like Tim Scott is more moderate than what he gives himself credit for. Like, it was just a couple of points that he was making, and I'm like, that reads more moderate than conservative. And I know that he is a Republican, he calls himself conservative, but he definitely had some moderate perspectives and viewpoints. One thing that stood out to me about this memoir in particular is that Tim Scott had definitely had a rough upbringing in terms of absent and abusive alcoholic father, trying to play football professionally, well, at least on the collegiate level, and getting that kind of taken away from him, and kind of having to restart everything. So I don't know why I don't know what I was expecting in terms of his backstory, but I think it just goes to show that, like, there are people who go through a lot of things regardless of whether we agree fundamentally on everything. Like, I think that it's interesting to really come into the understanding that everybody has a story, everybody has issues that they've gone through, and he was very transparent about his upbringing, which I thought was interesting. I think that he's very idealistic. He is very much so, and people can interpret this one of two ways. He can be read as he rides the fence a lot, which in some aspects I think he does. He doesn't want to offend either side of any perspective or point. But I think that that can be kind of dangerous because of the fact that if some side is bigoted and is offensive and is harmful to a group, there is no seeing that side. For me personally, I think that James Baldwin has a quote along those lines where like there is no compromising viewpoints or trying to see other perspectives when your perspective or view inherently harms someone. So that's one view of it, and I think I lean a little bit towards that most times. And there's this other side that I think a lot of reviewers and a lot of people are taking when they read Tim Scott's book, is that he just wants everybody to get along. And unfortunately, I don't think that that is a place where we are right now. I think that America has got to get worse before it can get better. I think that he was very realistic in saying that there is no cure-all for racism. Like, he identified that America has some racist roots, which, to be honest with you, I'm not gonna lie, I was very surprised that he even brought race into it. Now, he is kind of a bootstraps kind of guy. See, this is what I'm talking about. It's kind of like the both sides thing, where he can identify that racism is a thing and that America has its roots in racism and that it's still a problem today. But at the same time, he's a pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you know, there you can still make it. And but then at another point he was like, but I also know that everybody doesn't have the same opportunity to make it to the top. Everybody's not at the same starting point. So I guess I say all that to say that he's a people pleaser. And I get that because I've been there, and I can recognize that, wanting to make everyone happy. And in some regard, you can't make everybody happy. And I think he wants everyone to be happy. And I can't say that in this certain situation where I would love people to just respect each other, it's not realistic. Because when you have those extremists who just refuse, and extremists on both sides who just refuse to compromise and to just let people live their lives the way that they want to live their lives, it's not gonna happen. And that's the biggest issue that I think I had with it, is that I get where he's coming from, because at the end he talks about, like, you know, why can't we just show respect to our neighbors, whether you have an American flag in your front yard or whether you have a pride flag in your front yard? Why can't people just get along? Well, people can't just get along when people's beliefs are inherently harmful and traumatizing to other groups of people. It doesn't work that way. And I feel like that's where we kind of lost each other, is that while I too would love for everyone to get along, I would love for people to be able to respect each other, I know that some people's thoughts and beliefs will never, ever, ever allow that. And that's what makes this difficult. So it's interesting because he's able to recognize the divisiveness that's in this country. He's able to recognize the problems of this country. He talks about the issues with policing and police brutality. He talks about the issues of systemic racism and how it impacts Black people. He's talked about even his own personal experiences with the police and being a Black man in America and experiencing racism at the hands of his own party. It's very interesting. It is a very interesting read, and I found it to be more interesting and engaging than what I anticipated, because it's like, here's this Black man that can understand the plight of Black people, but still has trouble understanding that there is no kumbaya moment right now. You may want that so badly, and you may want everyone to get along, but I'm not going to sit at a table with a racist and just say, I respect where you're coming from. Let's just all get along. Let's not have this hatred in our hearts. I can't reckon with that. And I think that's where I struggle so greatly with this. And he's a very hopeful man. I don't think I ever recognize how hopeful Tim Scott is as a person. Like, he's very hopeful, like very, things are gonna get better, they have to get better, I know that we can do this as a country, we can get better. And like, I don't want to say like I admire him for that, but like I kind of like, I feel you just want things to get better, but it's not that simple. And it's almost like he recognizes the complexity, but he's still like, but I still just want everyone just to get along, because this country can be so great. It can be an amazing place. And it's like, but there's so many things that have to be dismantled first before you can even get to that point. There's so much reckoning that has to be done before you can get to that point. And when you live in a society that doesn't even want to acknowledge the foundation of how it was built, how we live on stolen land, how you brought people here, and this country was built on the backs of those people, like, until you have people who want to acknowledge and even reckon the roots, or recognize the roots of this country, you're not going to get anywhere. Because look at Florida, look at DeSantis. We're not going to teach AP FM. You have people who want to do away with the history. And it's not history in a way in which you're blaming people, but you have to know where you come from to know where you're going. And your own political party wants to censor America's past. So how could we move forward without knowing the past? And so it's almost like he's in some ways a black sheep to his party. No, I mean, yes, he's black. he's like one of a handful of black conservatives in major positions. But I mean that in a sense that I think that he wants to have both sides come together, but in politics it's kind of hard because it makes him look like he's riding the fence. In a lot of ways he is riding the fence, and he wants people to be able to see everything from all angles. But like I said, it's idealistic. It's not anything that's reality. I really did find the book itself, it was very interesting. I still don't fundamentally agree with Tim Scott. I don't think that we have a whole lot in common, and I don't think that we look at the plight of America the same way. But I can respect to a degree that he has this hope, you know, because hope is a powerful thing. But I also think that it's great to have hope, but you also have to be honest to what's going on now, what has happened in the past, and how those two things kind of are working with and against each other. So there's that. That was probably one of the biggest things that I ended up reading in the past 2 weeks, ended up finishing that one. I then ended up picking up the first book in the American Girl series because I randomly decided to pick it up. I know Bree from Block Petition had talked a lot about, I think, reading Addie's books. Bree, tell me if I'm wrong. I know Bree was talking about an American Girl series at one point, and I was actually going through a container of them when I was at work, and I was like, oh, you know what? I'll just go ahead and I'll read the first one because I haven't read them in years and I don't remember which ones I've read. But Meet Kirsten, American Girl, is the first one in the entire series. She is one of what they consider to be the main characters because there's so many spin-offs to the American Girl series. It's actually damn near impossible to find a list of everything that they've done with the American Girl series. But I did notice start here, these books started coming out in the mid 80s. I think this one came out in 1986. So Kirsten and her family are coming from Sweden to the United States in about the mid 1800s. So there's a lot of details about how people would immigrate to the US. You get to see kind of firsthand what the ship experience would be like, how they were treated in terms of like class, and the language barriers that they experience while being in the US. This was a little bit more dark than what I anticipated in terms of some content warnings. There is content warnings for death in this, which I mean, it's realistic, but I don't think I was expecting that in a children's chapter book series. It's not what I was expecting. And so, but it's, I mean, it's very true to the story. What else can you say? There's illustrations all throughout it, which I think would definitely appeal to those early chapter book readers. And then there's back matter that really details what immigration was like, specifically coming from Sweden to the United States, which I think was pretty cool. I am giving that one 3.5 stars. I have the second book in the series upstairs, so I'm looking forward to picking that up sometime soon. The next one that I ended up reading was The Neighbor Favor by Christina Forrest. This is one that I have very conflicting feelings about. Very, very conflicting feelings. This one appealed to me. It was one that I had put on my anticipated releases for the month of February. I was looking forward to it because I had read a Christina Forrest book a couple years ago, maybe like it would have been, no, almost 3 years ago. I think I read it in 2020, but I ended up reading Christina Forrest's book at that point and I enjoyed it. And I have a couple more of her books, and I am a huge fan of her writing style, but I am used to reading her from a YA perspective. This is an adult romance. It follows two main characters that both have interest in publishing. So we have a heroine who works in publishing. She's really stuck with these boring manuscripts, and she has wishes to work more so on the youth literature side because she finds it to be more engaging and fun. And she has this fantasy novel that she's read that she's kept with her for years, and she decides randomly to reach out to the author to, you know, really say how much the work has inspired her and how much she's enjoyed it. And the author of the book is actually our hero. And so they start with these email exchanges, and I think that's my whole thing too, is that I think when I was going to the book, I expected this kind of email exchange to be throughout the course of the book, which is what I was hoping for when I read the description of it at first. I was like, oh, this is going to be cute because there's going to be exchanges. I thought maybe it would be kind of like some publishing advice and editing going on, and him moving by her and she not knowing that, and he also not knowing that they're exchanging emails with each other. I thought that premise was going to be cool. But what actually ends up happening is that we get this huge chunk of emails in the beginning of the book, and then he ends up moving to the States because he's living overseas at the time. He ends up moving to the States, and he figures out that it's her and she doesn't know that it's him. So he's basically hiding his identity from her for a good portion of the book, which for me, I think I struggle with this kind of trope where it's like, we could have just been honest. It's not technically a miscommunication, but it's a communication thing that, like, you should have just told her it was you, and then you go from there. But you kind of are not honest throughout a good portion of the book, and so there's this big fallout when it does happen. I struggle with that, and it's a me thing. It's not a book. It's not the book. It's a me thing, and I did not know that that's how this book was going to play out. So this is a slow burn. So you're not going to really get any super heavy romantic elements to about 80% in the book. And I don't mind a slow burn, but I just like telling people that just in case, you know, you go in and you think things are going to be kind of like hot and heavy, which is what I'm used to at this point because of reading a lot of indie. I feel like the romance and the scene happens much quicker. And I've gotten so adjusted to that I think I struggle when I don't realize that something is a slow burn before I read it. And then I'm like, oh, okay, so this is a slow burn. And then I have to readjust my expectations of what to think of the relationship dynamics as I go through the course of the novel. I did like the publishing elements and the exchanging of books that they enjoyed. I liked seeing our heroine kind of develop into this character that was willing to stand up for herself, because I feel like she did a lot of things at the beck and call, I don't want to say beck and call, at the hopes of getting approval from her two sisters, which I get that, and then also dealing with a boss that's like hell on wheels, and watching her come full circle to being able to stand up to her boss and to, you know, say to her sisters, like, this is what's happening, and, you know, I don't want to continue to do stuff just to appease you. I think that I really enjoy that. I like the back elements of our hero. he struggled with his parental dynamics, like, greatly. It was horrid. His parents were not great humans. And so he, in the background, outside of his relationship, he is struggling greatly with how to fix those dynamics with his parents. And I really enjoyed learning more about that. But I also feel like it wrapped up too quickly for how tricky and how complex those relationship dynamics were. I think we could have explored that a little more. And I think this book was entirely too long. Like, this book is over 400 pages. I think we could have done with 50 to 75 pages less and still have gotten a solid romance. I was going to give this 3 stars, but I do feel like I said, I do feel like that whole miscommunication thing is my fault. Not my fault, but it's my personal quirk. And so I don't feel like I should hold that against Christina Forrest because of that. So I'm giving this one 3.5 stars. It is a solid romance. It's not the best romance that I've read, but it's also not the worst romance that I've ever read. So 3.5 is kind of, I think, standard for me when I read like a solid romance book. I am interested in how we will follow up with the 2 sisters, because it's clear that this will be a book that follows each one of the sisters. So I'm interested in seeing how all of those dynamics are going to play out, because there were some interesting elements involving her sisters and how they have their relationship, because one sister had been married, but her spouse ended up dying, and then another sister was about to get married, and then some stuff happens. So I'm interested in seeing all that stuff play out. But yeah, 3.5 stars. I really do like Christina Forrest as an author, but I think that this was one of the weaker ones that I've read from her. The next one that I have is Play the Game, and this is a young adult book that I randomly had seen when I was doing my own selections for my job. And it's a mystery. I want to say a thriller, but it's more like a mystery, where we are viewing the book from a main character by the name of VZ. His best friend, so it's a trio, one of his best friends ends up getting shot by the police, and the police officer, of course, is not convicted after his friend ends up dying. But then at the start of the novel, we find out that someone else has killed the police officer. And so it's the mystery surrounding, okay, well, who killed this police officer? And you don't really know who's done it. And so VZ is trying to figure it out. His friend that passed away is very much so into video games, and so there's this gamer element that I think a lot of people who are gamers are going to really enjoy. I'm not a strong gamer, so those elements kind of took me out of the story, but that's because I'm not a gamer. And I will say that. That's only because I'm not a gamer. That's no fault of the author or anything like that. I think if you are a gamer, those elements will be extremely interesting. Then we have the third part of the trio. I can't remember anybody's name except the main character. He's being framed as if he killed the police officer. There's the motive, and there is supposed evidence that he killed the police officer. So he's kind of on the run. So it's pretty much up to VZ to kind of figure out what happened. I think what I enjoyed about this one is this the first young adult book that I've read that captures the concept of restorative justice. To my knowledge, I've never read a book that goes over the idea of restorative justice and what it would look like. So it was really interesting seeing that. I loved that VZ was not a perfect character, and that even at the end of the book, he still gets called out for some thoughts and ideas that he had about his own best friend that was accused of the death of the police officer. So I struggle with the gamer element, but I think I could respect the pieces and parts of it that fit into the story as a whole, and I think it's vital to the story. I was not a huge fan of the love triangle situation, but I think if you, like I always say about these books, I am not the target audience. So I think the target audience would enjoy that and would appreciate that. But of course, for me as an adult, I'm just like, you know, there's a teenage angst element or whatever the case may be. But if we're talking about just the whole concept of restorative justice and how the mystery plays out and VC trying to figure everything out, I think it was a very, very solid debut book for this author, and so I ended up giving that one 4 out of 5 stars. The last book that I ended up reading was The Lost Sisters, which is book 1.5 in the, what is it, the Cruel Prince series. Is it the Cruel Prince series? I think so, y'all. I can't even, my brain is going kaput here, but if I'm wrong, y'all will let me know that I'm wrong. So this is told from Taryn's perspective, who is Jude's twin sister. I don't like Taryn, so reading this was a struggle. It's a novella. It was only 50 something pages, I think, maybe even shorter than that. And it's really Taryn trying to explain like why she did what she did in The Cruel Prince. And I still didn't have any empathy for Taryn, like at all. Like, she tries to explain and apologize to Jude for why she did what she did, but it was very, it was like Jude was maturing differently and really was like, I'm not going to stay here and let people decide my fate or make decisions for me or control me. And Taryn was like, very much so, I just want to be loved, lovesick. I want to fit in. And so they're polar opposites in my opinion. And I really like Jude as a character. It was very interesting watching her develop across The Cruel Prince. But reading this one, I was like, Terrence is like, I still, like, girl, what? I don't care. Either way, I still don't care. Like, you did some messed up stuff in that first book, and this doesn't really vindicate or doesn't really justify any decision that you made, because while your sister was trying to be boss, you were doing what? Like, and granted, I think a lot of it does have to do with the fact that she was manipulated and she allowed people to use her in ways that she didn't expect to be used, and she thought it was love and it wasn't love. And I can get that, but I think because I already didn't really care for Taryn, I kind of went into this with a certain level of bias. So there's that. I think that I'm just gonna give it, I'm floating in between 2.5 to 3 stars, but definitely no higher than 3 stars. So that's kind of where I settled on that one. So now is the time where I talk about what I'm currently reading. I'm not really reading a lot right now, y'all. I've been so busy and I've been so tired, and it's just been a lot going on. Not bad stuff, but just a lot going on in my life that I just haven't had the capacity to really read much of anything. I will say I've started a couple of things which I'm hoping to finish. The first one is A Light, The Firecracker Cousins by A.H. Cunningham. This is a black romance by a Panamanian author that I was recommended. Who recommended me this book? Heather recommended A.H. Cunningham before. And so I decided to start with The Firecracker Cousins. And I'm about 60 to 63% into that one. So hopefully I'll finish that one this week at some point. I am also listening to, now this one I will not finish this week because I had to return my audiobook and put it back on hold because it's so long and I am listening to it slower, and that's G-Man, J. Edgar Hoover and the Making of the American Century. So this follows, it's an extensive history of J. Edgar Hoover, who, if you did not know, played a big role in shaping the CIA. But it's over 800 pages and the audiobook is like somewhere around like 36 hours. For nonfiction, I do not listen to it any faster than 1.5, and for this one in particular, I dropped it down to 1.25 because it's a lot of information and I didn't want to miss anything. So there's that one. And then I also started another, I've been on a nonfiction kick. That's the thing. It's not a problem, it's just a thing. So I've been on a nonfiction kick, and the next one that I'm currently reading is Waco by Jeff Gwynne. I think that's how you say his last name, but that's the same author of The Road to Jonestown, and he also wrote a book on the Mason family. So very big into cults. So this is about the Waco, what happened at Waco during the siege and it's of course about David Koresh and the Branch Davidians, and what went wrong. Because if you know anything about Waco, what they anticipated going in and doing was not what happened. It went left very, very quickly. So I was really interested in that because that's due in a few days. But other than that, y'all, I don't know what I'm going to, and it's not that I don't have anything, I just don't know what I'm going to pick up this week, because I've had a lot going on. I have some stuff on Libby that I need to get through, but I will let y'all know when I end up reading when we get to Sunday of this week. So you're getting 2 weekly things back to back, but it's fine. It's not a big deal. All right, y'all, let me know in the comment box below what you've read over the past couple of weeks and what you plan on reading for the rest of the month, because February is almost over with. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. If you're looking for ways to support the channel through Patreon, the links are down in the description box below, and I'll be back with another video soon.